Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about inequalities. So your goal after watching this video today will be able to interpret and solve linear inequalities. So starting off, I always think of this example, for inequalities, and you might have seen this video. If not, I think it might be worth a watch. It's reasonably funny. It's Jimmy Fallon and Kevin Hart. They go to an amusement park and they go to ride a big roller coaster. So if you've been to an amusement park before, like Kings Island, anything like that, you might notice that before you get on the ride, you have to make sure that you're a certain height. So you have to be taller than that sign. So anyone that is this height or higher will be able to ride. So in this picture, Jimmy, the park worker, for sure can ride. Kevin, he's pretty close. We're not super sure, so we might have to take a closer look and see if he's actually able to go on. So that's an example of an inequality, is that anybody above that line can ride. It's not just one value. It's not like you can only ride this if you're exactly 6 feet tall. It's basically anyone that's probably over like 5 feet tall can ride it. So a funny video in here, they ask Kevin to measure his height, and he has a pretty expectedly unhappy reaction to that. So that's kind of the idea. Think about amusement parks and kind of those height requirements. I think that's the one that comes to mind first for me when I'm thinking about inequalities. And there's a lot of examples out there, but here's a fun one, hopefully to keep it fresh in your mind. Before we go on and before we actually do definitions, a little bit of review. So thinking way back, and I know it's probably been a while since we've done these, but this would have been like Algebra 1 or pre-algebra, any of that middle school type, early high school math. We had some questions here that these come up pretty frequently with negatives. So when we're doing inequalities with negatives, there is something that happens. So for example, like right here, we have negative 6x. When we have negatives, we have to flip the sign. So if you have, to be more specific, if you have a negative coefficient in front of the variable that you're solving for, that's going to mean that your final answer, when you have x here, we have to change the sign the other way around. So again, negative variable means that when we have our x here, we have to change this sign to its other way. So again, negative variable, we'll have x, and then we'll have to change the sign. Another negative variable, so x, we have to change the sign. Here, not a negative variable, so we don't change the sign. And again here, not a negative variable, so we don't change the sign. A second thing to note with flipping the signs, make sure your x stays on the right if it starts on the right, and then it stays on the left if it starts on the left. Otherwise, flipping your sign is going to get a little bit more confusing, and just to be careful with those steps. But the big idea here is whenever you see a negative that applies to your variable, that will end up with flipping or changing the sign, the inequality sign. All right, so a little bit of review out of the way there. Hopefully that review sounds familiar. I know it might have been a little bit, but that's the idea for today. A second skill that we have to kind of keep in mind. So what is an inequality? That's our vocab word for today. It's an unbalanced equation with one heavier side. So if we're thinking about our balance and our seesaw, like we've talked about a few times, what we're going to notice is that if we have an equation, we have equal weight on both sides, so it is an equation. And here we might have a large amount of weight here, a small amount of weight here. It is not balanced, so we're going to call this an inequality. That's what we're looking at here. An unbalanced seesaw, there's more weight on one side than the other. That's what makes it an inequality. A quick reminder here, the different types of inequalities. So this is greater. This one is greater or equal. We have less, and we have less than or equal to. So if you forgot how to say those verbally, there's just a quick note on how to say those out loud. All right, so let's take a look through a couple of these examples to solve. We'll do the top two, and then you'll have the opportunity to practice the remaining ones. So same steps like we were for solving equations. Still want to get our variable alone. So if x is less than 1, the only difference here is just don't write an equal sign, right? It's an inequality, not an equals. Let's circle this here. We have a negative in front of our variable, so that means when we get to the end, we're going to flip the sign. Same steps, though, to get there. So we'll get negative 2x is less than or equal to 4. Divide both sides by negative 2. We'll get x is now less than or equal to negative 2. All right, so same thing for the remaining questions here. Make sure we're carefully going through and paying close attention to any of those negative signs. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. As always, any questions, let me know, and I'll see you very soon.